What's happening, boys and girls? It's your main man, Kawaii in the streets, Senpai in the sheets, Jack Slack. And it's the Fights Gone By podcast, episode 128. I don't know. Boy, howdy, was that a shit card. That was just terrible. I caught up on it the next morning, as I often do, and I went, oh, Pettis versus Thompson, that's interesting. That one turned out exciting. And then I went backwards from the main event, and it just got worse and worse. Well, actually, no, the peak badness was probably Justin Willis laying underneath Curtis Blades, unable to do anything. But just a boring night of fights. And I threatened to review Baki the Grappler instead. And I am actually going to talk about Baki the Grappler now because, not Baki the Grappler, but Baki 2018, the Netflix one. Because people have been recommending me this for fucking ages. I think because I said I liked Hajime no Ippo, or at least the few episodes I watched of it. And then they did a poster for Ryzen at some point. And I didn't really know what it was all about. I was like, MMA anime, sounds a bit lame. And then I was working on some work, and I like to have something on in the background on Netflix if I'm just, chilling at home on my own. So I went looking for Attack on Titan Season 2, which they still don't have up, so fuck them. But they had this thing Baki, and I was like, is that the same Baki? And I put it on, and I really enjoyed it. It was pretty fucking weird. In the opening episode, the guy, the bad guy, the Hannibal Lecter style bad guy, goes, "What's the most dangerous gas?" and then teleports behind the dude and blows in his ear, and his brain comes out the other side. Oh, but I loved it. It was great, and loads of actual martial arts history references, which are fun for me because I have a wide knowledge of martial arts history, and it's largely useless to my profession in mixed martial arts. So they got Doppo Orochi, who's like the karate guy, but he's basically Sagat, but he's not. Looks like Sagat, but he's basically Masoyama. He started like a karate cult called the Shinshin Kai or something like that. And he's called the Tiger Killer in this series, and there's a big poster of him killing a tiger on the side of the building. Which is obviously a reference to Masoyama's fictional fights with bulls. If you don't know anything about Masoyama, he's probably worth looking into because he was a hugely influential figure in the development of karate around the world. And, he trained people like Andy Hug. But an awful lot of the Masoyama myth is just myth. He was a strong man with like a travelling circus at one point. He was a very, very strong dude with good karate skills. But a lot of what he did was just monkey. Well, he literally called it monkey business. There's a great article by John Blooming, who only died the other week, about Masoyama and the monkey business. It was things like the bottle cut, which was, and they did the bottle cut in this series actually. But the bottle cut was you get a beer bottle, you stand it in place, and then you shuto, knife hand strike the neck off it. And there are all sorts of theories, like the Japanese beer bottle is thinner, so it works like that. Or you scratch around the edge with a stone, and that perforates it so that it snaps off in the right place. But basically all that happened was, through the 1970s, loads of dudes ended up going to A&E with severed arteries or veins or whatever in their wrists, because they'd smash the bottle and it just goes straight into their hand. It's like when dudes punch windows. You always feel like, if you hit a window, it'll just blow out and fall to pieces. But you forget that the glass falls from the top half of the window and can slice your arm off, basically. That's how Goldberg ended up partly responsible for tanking WCW. He ended up taking time off with an injury because he was supposed to break this car window with a bar, like a crowbar or something like that. And he said, no, I'll do it with my fist, like Bill Goldberg actually would. So he severed an artery and was out of action for weeks. The funniest part of that bit in the anime, though, with him being the tiger killer, Doppo Orochi, is that he goes, yes, I did actually kill a tiger, but I don't talk about it and I keep it to myself. And you're like, I just saw the building with you killing the tiger on the side of it. Very, very silly stuff. And then there's a Chinese martial artist, and they did a good job of, differentiating their fighting styles. The Chinese martial artist has more, vertical punches and more bowed knees outwards sort of stances, or the short sort of cat stance, whereas the karateka have longer, more Japanesey style stances. And there's a section with flying kama. If you don't know what a kama is, it's like a sickle. It's part of the kabuto weaponry. Kabuto is like the Okinawan makeshift weaponry art. So the nunchuck was part of it, but that's allegedly more of a Chinese origin instrument. But it's things like the tonfa, which basically became the nightstick, and the eku, which is the oar. I like the oar because if you're working on an island as a fisherman, it's a nice weapon that you happen to have around all the time. You don't really need to hide it; you just brain people with it. And there's other things like there's a knuckle duster, which has some kind of name, and a ball on a whip. But the kama is a sickle, and typically one has two of them. And that's the most weapon-like farming implement that you have, something for cutting down crops. But the flying kama is a sickle attached to a string or a rope or a chain, and you whip it around in circles and then fling it at people. And I saw it was one of I think it was an Okinawan karate and kabuto festival that they did in the 90s. Morio Higiona was there and a few other people, but they had a kabuto master come on, and he did a flying kamakata, and he had this long black hair, and about halfway through you realise that while he's doing this, whipping this camera around, there's big clumps of hair appearing on the mat underneath him. He's accidentally cutting his own hair off. And then they drop in bits of history, like in Hajime no Ippo, which you're not actually sure if they're true, like the Prohibition-era gangsters used to dip their hands in grease and then put them in broken glass and fist fight like that, which I don't recall hearing about, but maybe it was a thing. You hear about the rope fist, glass and resin matches in Burma, and the old Thai style matches like that, but you never know how much of that's true. Anyway, 10 on 10, would recommend you watch that series mainly for the ultra-violence, but for fun little martial arts history bits too. There's a bit where a dude takes a hair out of his head and flicks it at the other guy's eye, and that reminded me of reading ages ago. When was that? Years and years ago, I was reading some article about, I think they were called the Hatchet Men. They were like a Chinese gang in America. So it was like, back when America was still treating Chinese people as horrendously, but they had these gangs, and one of the things that they claimed they could do was blow a needle out of their mouth with devastating accuracy. You just keep it in the corner of your mouth and then you blow it at someone. I think it was also them that they were said to have sharpened like coins and used those as weapons, like throwing weapons. But 10 on 10. Go watch Baki. It's weird, and it stops very abruptly, and the last episode seems to be nothing to do with the actual plot. Also, I realised after this episode that almost none of the program had been anything to do with Baki himself. But apparently, like, the series has continued. It's already out in Japanese. Netflix only bothered to release half of it dubbed, which is really weird. But then, there are going to be people who are angry that I watched the dub, because you don't get the nuance of the Japanese language through the dub. Jack, you bucker. So yeah, I'll dig out the Japanese version of that through some kind of streaming site, and I'll have a watch of the rest. But I really enjoyed it, so thanks for the recommendation on that one, people. Well worth your time. So I suppose we better talk about those shit fights then. Actually, we can do a bit of news first. What we got going on? Oh, Li Jiangliang is out of his fight with Alex Oliveira at UFC Fort Lauderdale. That's a shame, because that would have been one of the dirtiest fights in the history of the welterweight division. I referred to Alex Oliveira as the filthy Cowboy Oliveira in my Filthy Casuals Guide to Gunnar Nelson, and someone came in and was like, "Why are you calling him Filthy, Jack? Is it because he's one of 18 children and he grew up in the street? Because that would be pretty cruel, wouldn't it, Jack?" And I was like, well, does that have any impact on how much he cheats in every fight? Because if not, then that's not what I'm referring to. It's to do with him being a filthy cheat. The dude grabs the fence, elbows the back of the head, pokes the eyes, just about every fight he's in. Very scrappy and dirty fighter. And Li Jiangliang, obviously most famous for trying to gouge Jake Matthews' eyes out of his head to escape a guillotine. But a good fun pressure fighter, with weird sidekicks and shit too. So shame we're missing out on that. Jose Aldo was hospitalised with a bacterial infection this week, which was worrying. We were all like, uh-oh, there goes that Volkanovski fight. But he's since been discharged, and apparently that fight's going ahead. So if he's feeling strong enough to do that, there was the one back in the day when he fought, not Hideki, Dude, the Korean zombie laid out off a fake glove touch when he tried to catch him cold. Hominick, when he fought Hominick, he had just been on like a heavy course of antibiotics, and it made him look pretty bad throughout. It compared to, what the standard we accepted as base level Aldo. So yeah, brave of him to take on a fighter as good as Volkanovski if he's coming off, I presume a course of Oh wait, no, is it bacterial? Do you get antibiotics, or is that a viral thing? I don't know. Anyway, and then Robin van Roosmalen signed with One. Seems to be implying that he's going to be doing some MMA there, because I always thought like he was always teasing it, and they'd always go, and he has a black belt in judo, but he'd always end up staying with Glory because they'd offer him more money. The tease to go to MMA was always for the money, like Gokhan Slaki, and I was thinking like if One's going to hire you regardless, why not just stick to the thing you're really really good at? And he would have to adapt pretty severely to do well in MMA because his style is... I was watching people have an argument over the term bull guard, which I regret writing down now. Comparing his style with his style of kickboxing with Justin Gaethje's style of MMA, and there's a bit of a difference because Justin Gaethje isn't relying almost entirely on his gloves. Robin van Roosmalen has these big pillows on the side of his head that protect him from harm anytime the opponent throws punches at him. He does have some awesome low kicks and counter combinations, though. So, yeah, could be fun. I just can't see it holding up when he's fighting better wrestlers, if they start faking the shot, coming up with the uppercut, or just slam punches down the middle while he's worrying about being taken down. Anyway, let's talk about this shitty card. I'm not going to talk about a lot of it, to be honest, because it was garbage. Randa Marcos versus Angela Hill was interesting, because I always like watching Angela Hill, because she's one of about 20 women in the UFC who aren't just terrible at striking. She's pretty slick, actually. In fact, one of my favourite women's MMA fights of all time is her versus Andrade. But yeah, she ended up getting in clinches and then got taken down, and Randa Marcos went to the back. Started doing that Danaher stuff, getting onto the weak side and posted rear mounts, and then moved into a lovely armbar. So excellent finish from Randa Marcos. Jennifer Maia versus Alexis Davis was hard work, but then so is every Alexis Davis fight. Side note, one of the referees in Brazil, whenever they take a card to Brazil, is Osiris Maia, which is just a great name. Mama Maia called her children Damien, Jennifer, and Osiris. Then you had Marlon Vera versus Frankie Saenz. This one was awkward as hell, because if you watch that finishing flurry, 3 or 4 of those, like, from overhead hammer fists just comes down straight on the back of Sainz's head. And you hate to see that, because, like, one is bad enough to affect a fight severely. But then this is what I said since, like, Akiyama versus Belfort. If you're trying to finish, you might as well just hit him in the back of the head, because it's going to be more effective finishing them, and you're probably not going to get called on it. Bryce Mitchell versus Bobby Moffett won Fight of the Night, which just shows you how low the quality of this was overall. I mean, it was a okay fight, but on any other card, it would be absolutely forgettable. Really, the interesting stuff was Bryce Mitchell dropped him with a quick left hand early on. Bobby Moffett kept showing strikes, as in, like, miming them and not doing them. And then they'd scramble whenever they were on the... He'd take Mitchell down. Mitchell would start working on the Kimura over his back, and then they'd somehow end up scrambling back to guard. There was a nice Darce attempt, but Mitchell's arm was on the wrong side for him to finish it. And that's really all there was to it. Macy Barber versus JJ Aldrich strayed into the realms of interesting at points. I liked Barber's those vertical, coming in from the side elbows, breaking from the clinch, and I think that was what she hurt her with, and then proceeded to finish. Oh no, it was a good right hand out at distance, but yeah, that was interesting to watch. She did not look unbeatable in that fight. Obviously, she was. I'd say she was probably losing for a lot of it. But she came out of the clinch hard, and then she landed a good right hand, and then she followed up with knees and punches and got the stoppage, which is always impressive in women's MMA, especially in the flyweight division. Luis Pena versus Steven Peterson. Luis Pena been teasing this move down to featherweight for a while, it seems now, but maybe that's just because I watched those I Am the Bay videos, and then failed to make it. So good work him. Came in like 2.5 pounds over. This was an alright fight. There was a nice moment where Luis Pena got a Kimura grip. I think it was along the fence, and he was coming up from the bottom, and he went to like the turtle with the Kimura grip, and then he rolled over what is not... You roll over the shoulder nearest the opponent to go over the top and try and sweep them with the Kimura, So you come up like on top, but with your back down into them. But he tried rolling over the other shoulder, which is one that Neil Melanson teaches to set up, like rolling into triangles. And he almost did it, which was pretty cool. Yeah, I thought he looked good enough in a featherweight debut. It's just like he didn't make featherweight. That's the main problem. Jussier Formiga handed Deiveson Figueiredo his first loss. And yeah, Figueiredo really just, even in the moments when he could get away from Formiga and start trying to work stuff, he just didn't seem to have the urgency at several points. You know, he'd walk towards him and then look for the big uppercut, but by the time he was looking for it, Formiga would be like, nah, I'm not having that, and then in a clinch or just away. Figueiredo, I really think, you know, if you're going to strike with guys who are going to be able to take you down or beat you in the wrestling, you need to be able to use some volume, like, the straight kicks to the front of the knee and the jab, and you need to be able to move your feet to be evasive. If you're going straight at the guy, you need to be able to stop the takedowns. If you're going at the guy throwing the hard punches with no jabs or anything, you need more volume when you're doing it, like combinations, body shot flurries and uppercuts into left hooks and things. And you need wrestling strong enough that you can shuck them off and make it happen again. You can't just go, there's my strike for the next 3 minutes gone. Yeah, so Formiga wins, so that's the end of the flyweight division, and Dana White teased this morning that they're going to do Cejudo versus Moraes for the bantamweight title, so pretty much out the door with the flyweight division, I reckon. John Makdessi fought Jesus Pineda in a boring one, but I will apologise to John Makdessi because I looked at this and was like, wait, are they giving him a gimme? But then I remembered, oh wait, no, the previous week I've been excited for him versus the Grits, Chris Gritsmacher, whatever his name is. And Pineda had another guy scheduled to fight, and they both lost their opponent, and they put this match together at short notice. Then Curtis Blades laid all over Justin Willis in a fucking snoozer. And then the main event was actually interesting. Anthony Pettis versus Stephen Thompson. Anthony Pettis, coming up from lightweight, has been all the way down to featherweight. I gave him very little chance. I thought, like, what's he really going to do? But he did a really good job. He wasn't doing, like, clever in and out evasive stuff. He was trying to walk Thompson down. He had his guard up high. He was picking up his lead knee a lot, and it made Thompson's path for the side kick very tricky. He was struggling to get that in properly, and the hook and the round kick off that were difficult because Pettis' hands were always up high. Pettis was working on the front leg side kick and straight kick into the lead knee, which Stephen Thompson hates, and Pettis was using it against Holloway. You know, his best successes against Holloway came with side kicks off the lead leg. And Thompson went to something more interesting, actually, because you could see an adaptation in Thompson when he saw that, like, he was struggling to get his single shot side kicks through. And the defensive side kick wasn't really doing much because Pettis wasn't, like, running onto him. He was just sort of stepping to him and going, okay, making some pressure, getting close enough to throw some hands. So Thompson would switch to southpaw, or open guard, rather, to match up stances with Pettis, and then he would throw his rear leg with a ball of the foot kick, like a front kick or a slightly up inward or an upward round kick, with the ball of the foot, which he showed against Johnny Hendricks, and he did a little bit more earlier in his UFC run, but it's something that he has in the bag. And he'd kick with the ball of the foot, and then he'd come down into an orthodox stance, which I really like. That's a Shinzo Machida special. If you watch Shinzo Machida in Bellator, when he's fighting open guard with the opponent, he will throw his rear leg front kick to the stomach and then step in with a really hard, well, I suppose it's a jab, but he's stepping into it in his new stance. But if you're someone who can punch in combinations more competently than Machida, which is almost everyone, you can use that to enter with the kick and then start combination punching from a closed guard position, which is what Thompson did at one point. And then he faked the kick later. He lifted his knee up and then just stepped in with the straight, which was nice. But Pettis was doing a good job of basically catch and pitch. He'd wait for Thompson to throw something and then he'd come back with a low kick. And towards the end of that second round, you really saw him landing more frequently. He's getting the lead leg, and he was also stamping on the lead leg, which obviously Thompson hates because he had to have he didn't like it before he had to have an operation because Darren Till did it to him, but he's really wasn't enjoying it here. And then Pettis was also stepping deep and kicking across the back thigh, which is a great choice, I think, for... it's a great choice for even experienced kickboxers, like Beneil Dariush was doing it to Edson Barbosa. Teaser for this week's Filthy Casuals guide. But very good against someone like Stephen Thompson, who knows that his lead leg is a target with how far in front of him he presents it. So you let him come in and then you go for the back leg. That's going to throw him for a loop. There are people who are like, Pettis was pulling himself back into this fight and so on. I think, despite his successes and giving Thompson difficulty in landing cleanly with his usual things, Thompson was still pretty much kickboxing him up for most of this fight. Gets him to the fence, but this is the thing we talked about in the second Woodley fight. Thompson, it used to blow people's minds that Thompson could outstrike Rory McDonald. Rory McDonald could outstrike Tyron Woodley, and then Stephen Thompson would be completely confused against Tyron Woodley. That's because Rory McDonald went for Stephen Thompson and hung around in the open, and worked well when Tyron Woodley was on the fence. Stephen Thompson didn't work well when Tyron Woodley was on the fence. That's just he doesn't have a great many things he's comfortable using there, and also if you try and combination strike on the fence, you're getting close enough for them to try and take you down or clinch you, or to be hit with a counter. So he moves in on Pettis along the fence, he kicks, he basically ends up out of position as Pettis is coming back with the Superman punch. I knew the result because I'd seen the news, and I was watching Pettis land these low kicks, and I was going, oh, he's setting him up nicely here. But then the Superman punch was like nothing to do with those low kicks. It was to do with him just coming off the fence while Thompson was out of position. I think the Superman punch might have worked for him later in the fight out in the open, based on the amount of low kicking he'd been doing. But always interesting to see one of those come off. So great job, Anthony Pettis. Called out a couple of people afterwards, including Rafael dos Anjos, which is an interesting one. Because I think Anjos is still a horrible stylistic matchup for him, unless dos Anjos has really lost a step. And Stephen Thompson woke up in hospital and was like, dang! And put out this really endearing clip where he's just like, didn't know I got knocked out until they told me afterwards. And, yeah, he seems cool. He's 36, 37 now? So he's still got some in him, but, it's going to be hard getting back to that title shot. But then, the thing about these things is that there tends to be, like, one guy lined up or two guys lined up, and then suddenly we're all like, oh, who is there at welterweight now? Guys will beat two people, and then you'll be like, oh, they cleared out the division. So, as long as he stays in the mix and keeps being Wonder Boy, he should be all right. It's always interesting in these, like, coming up in weight fights when the smaller guy wins. I'm trying to work out, like, trends in it, and you can overanalyze this, but I think it's quite interesting because, like, as a striker to do well against wrestlers in the division, you tend to need to be good with your feet and strong enough to stop them taking you down, or at least fight your way back up. Whereas Pettis might not be able to stop the takedowns of a Tyron Woodley or whoever, or evade a Johnny not Johnny Hendricks now, but a Johnny Hendricks type. But he certainly surprised Thompson with his speed a little bit there, and his just decently solid fundamentals. It was interesting comparing this to the fight with Edson Barbosa, which I was watching this week, Pettis' fight with him, because Pettis just looked thrown for a loop by how fast Barbosa was, and also Pettis really doesn't throw in combination very much at all. We were saying this in the preview podcast, but Barbosa, while it doesn't have all, like, the cleanest, most thought-out combinations, he will just spam hands. So he comes back with, like, 3 punches for every one that Pettis throws, and Pettis just really looked confused by it, and by Barbosa's speed. Whereas Thompson really, again, not typically great at combination punching. Done it more recently, especially against, like, Masvidal. But again, more of a sharpshooter, and Pettis did well at taking away his sharpshooting weapons. Anyway, I'm sorry it was such a boring event. I shouldn't have to apologise on behalf of the UFC, but I am. Yeah. Luckily, this weekend we are being blessed with Justin Gaethje versus Edson Barbosa, which will be insane. I'm not going to get into that now. We've got a Filthy Casuals guide coming, and because both the people that I chose out of the previous two main events, or rather previous two events, to do a Filthy Casuals guide about went on to lose, I'm going to do one on both. I'm going to do a Gaethje versus Barbosa fight, which might mean we just don't get the fight, but at least it'll do away with the curse of one man losing. Anyway, let's do a couple of questions, then we'll get out of here for today. Hey Jack, big fan of the podcast and your articles, brackets RIP Fightland. One of my BJJ training partners just mentioned that he has his first amateur MMA fight coming up. While reading your articles and following your podcast has undoubtedly given me the finest education an armchair coach could ask for, I was curious to get your thoughts on some of the particulars of things that tend to work well in no-gi that don't translate all too well to MMA grappling and vice versa. Obviously there's some nuance to this, e.g. deep half guard intuitively seems like a bad idea, but in practice it seems to differ from fighter to fighter. Do you have any particular examples of positions or techniques that change dramatically in viability with the context switch? Thanks, Alex. Well, I think most importantly, you've got the addition of striking means you want to take away space. This was Eddie Bravo's whole thing. He was obsessed with clinching guards. And I think you either want to take away space or create too much space and scramble up is the basic rule of being in guard. Dudes who are good at guard in no-gi tend to be good at breaking people down, for closed guard stuff. But if you watch someone like Craig Jones or whoever working their like half guard knee shield, they will chill with the opponent postured up, and you just can't do that in MMA. If someone's postured up, the easiest thing in the world is to drop some hammer fists. It's not a particularly nuanced move, and it doesn't take a lot of energy. I think being stacked up is another thing that people don't necessarily deal with well if they come from a pure grappling background. There's not a lot of stuff you can do in the guard just by stacking people up, unless you've got like a blade of the forearm on the throat, which most people are like, come on dude, that's douchey, learn to open the guard properly. But in MMA there's nothing to stop you doing that, and then you can always just posture up and start striking. Pop up to your feet and then start striking rather. Leaning on you, giving you pressure and things like that. You've got to be, I think MMA, a lot of guys who don't have success getting up off their backs or struggle getting held down are the dudes who are reluctant to open their guard and make something happen. One of Volkanovski's recent opponents, it was not one of the ones you can remember because of their name, not a particularly highly regarded one, but Volkanovski does a very good job of getting people on the fence, taking them down, and then they're stuck against the fence, so that he can just stay on top of them, smashing him from closed guard a lot of the time. But this lad realized that if he just opened his guard, scissored his legs so that one knee was in front, Volkanovski would be forced to pass or start passing to get back in and do some damage, and that's when he could come up on the single leg, the half guard single. Or if he went all the way past, he could just come up with the underhook and try and chase the single leg. So I think in MMA, the temptation once you start throwing strikes in is I've got to be even more desperate to hold on to my position, when really you'd be better served to just flow with it and make stuff happen and use the movement to get back up and things like that. I like to think of KJ Noons versus Nick Diaz 1. Diaz gets him down and it's KJ Noons just shows his back for a moment so that Diaz will jump on it and then immediately turns back into him and scrambles out again. There's more value, especially if you're running, if time is a factor. You don't want to be on your back for 2 minutes losing the round. It's good to make stuff happen more than it is to control people a lot of the time, especially as the triangle and the armbar from the bottom just basically don't appear at most levels of MMA anymore, because leaning into people and hitting them until they move their feet a bit tends to work. I think another important thing that's nothing to do with striking really, but a massive difference between MMA and no-gi grappling is the gloves. That is a huge thing. I've mentioned Eddie Bravo once, but he got called by the head of, I think it was 10th Planet Korea or something like that, some scrub that they hired for Marcelo Garcia's first opponent. And Marcelo Garcia had been training at American Top Team, guillotining everyone because he's Marcelo Garcia. And Marcelo Garcia, if you get his first book, it's all about, his intro is all about how he's excited to go into MMA now and make waves there. And obviously that never happened because he had one MMA match, and this guy was you got to go look up the Eddie Bravo story because he tells it so well. But the guy calls him up and goes our man's fighting up Marcelo Garcia, and Eddie Bravo's oh damn, he's going to lose. And then they said, what should we do? And Eddie Bravo said, just focus on positional sparring, have people take your back over and over again, and just fight the hands. Hold on to the hand, not the glove, but hold on to the hand just above the glove so that they can't get the hand out. And in that fight, Marcelo gets his back, and if there were no gloves, Marcelo would have killed him in an instant, basically. But this guy just holds onto Marcelo's wrists, survives, and then they get put back on the feet and he just boxes him up. So the best rear naked choke artist in the history of no-gi grappling can be stifled by some unknown Korean dude just based on the gloves. It should tell you how significant that difference is. Cheers, Alex. Hi, Jack. I love the discussions going on regarding MMA judging of late. There is clearly an issue, but no one seems to have an idea better than the 10-point must system. Do you think judging could be made tighter by allowing the judges to discuss split or majority decisions until they can all come to a unanimous decision, similar to how jurors need to agree unanimously? I would like to see how this could have affected outcomes of fights such as Wonderboy versus Till, McGregor versus Diaz 2, Whittaker versus Ramiro 2. Just interested in the discussion. Thanks for the constant top-class content. You are one of the best voices in MMA today. David, P.S. What is your choice of tea? I am a Yorkshire tea man, but my fiancé is strictly PG tips. Tried to compromise on Tetley, but it didn't work. Oh, I like a Twinings. I'm a bit of a posho like that. But sorry, I've been giggling since I read that because I was just picturing like a 12 Angry Men scenario where I'm the only one scoring the fight for Michael Bisping, and we have to go into a back room while I convince everyone else to. Either that, or you have the judges going like, Jack, how come you scored it for Bisping? And I'd be like, let's just say it moved me to a bigger house. Yeah, I think there's all kinds of problems. I don't think you can have judges talking to each other because then, they influence each other. But then that would be the whole point of having them talk to come to a unanimous decision. It would just basically be people trying to win each other over. And to be honest, I don't think the judges care that much. Like, they're not going to be like they'll go, oh, okay, cool, I'll change, and that's whoever had the dissenting vote just joins on to the main vote. It also would just make cheating in these fights so much easier. Not so much in MMA, I suppose. Well, I mean, you could see that happening in MMA, but like some of the decisions coming out in boxing lately, where the cards just read like someone had it planned before they even went in. And you go, yeah, I had Deontay winning 1 through 4, and you're like, how? How did you have them winning 1 through 4? Because I had a set number I had to get to at the end. I worked backwards from there. I think, yeah, it's tricky. It's the same thing as politics. We need more accountability for the people who are making these decisions, but you aren't just allowed to like burn their houses down after they go home. So, what are you going to do? And they can't, in returning purely to judging here, but they can't just cut people when they make horrendous decisions because there aren't enough people doing the judging. So you end up with these idiots coming back time and time again. They go like, oh, he's going to do a couple on a lower card. We're going to show him a videotape about judging again to reacquaint him with the system, and then he'll come back and judge another Mayweather fight. I don't know. I mean, even if you went entirely to computers or something like that, and they scored round by round on the strike, it still varies so much. A strike isn't just a strike. A strike is like how it affects the fight in that moment. Did they stumble off the strike? Is a Robbie Lawler strike equal to a Ben Askren strike? Well, obviously not. Oh, but then the one we all lost our shit over was, is a Carlos Condit flicky kick equal to a Robbie Lawler bomb to the head? Leg jabs, we got back into that. As soon as you start trying to count numbers, people go, leg jabs, what the fuck is a leg jab? So I think the 10-9 probably work. Really, it should just be like 2-point must. You give a 2-1 for a good round. Well, you give a 2-1 for a close round and a 2-0 for a blowout round. Because no one's using the other, 7 points of it. I don't know. I don't think there's a way around it. Because ultimately, if one guy's not laying unconscious at the end, there isn't really a way to decide a fight unless one guy is just his face is hanging off and the other guy's untouched. And that's why there's always going to be these people who are like, why don't we just make everything a draw if you go the distance? You're like, well, then, because you're just rewarding the dude for taking a horrendous beating and not dying. It's tricky. I'm trying to think of better ways to do it, but in all the time that I've been thinking about this sport, every time judging comes up, I go, oh, shit, we need to fix it. 10-point must system sucks. But really, there isn't a way around it because, I don't know. And then on that note, I'll leave that question. Sorry I couldn't fix the judging, David. Hey Jack, Patreon boy and long-time fan here. Bottom half guard seems to be one of the BJJ positions most starkly weakened in MMA due to the threat of strikes. Besides the Damian Maia approach of using half guard to pull up the single leg, which half guards do you think are the most effective in MMA? Initially I thought knee shield / Z guard because of the ability to maintain distance as the person on the bottom, which could still be valid, but I took a look at some Craig Jones instructionals and it seems like he plays the position much closer than I realised. Thanks for your thoughts. From Hart. Yeah, the knee shield it's interesting because there are different knee shields. Like, a low knee shield is what Craig Jones uses, whereas his coach, Lachlan Giles, uses quite a high knee shield, like up in the armpit. The low knee shield is like keeping the opponent's hips away, but you have problems with dudes. Craig Jones, firstly, is very, very strong in the position, because if you start rolling with good, strong, heavy top dudes, they're going to sprawl on your legs hard. And Jones is very good at using like the opponent coming down on top of his leg to set up climbing up for triangles and things. In fact, a lot of Craig Jones is like half sort of a counter-fighty sort of style. He waits for the opponent to take an underhook, and then he takes the overhook and starts climbing up for triangles or omoplatas and things like that. And if they back off, that's when he starts looking to sort of half invert or invert through on a leg. Whereas if they back off in MMA, it's a little bit more problematic, because they can start dropping elbows on your head, especially if you do like the double hands gable grip around the leg, as Jones does to like drag himself in on it. You can get trapped there like Bigfoot versus Kane, or Shogun versus Jones. Guys just get trapped with the underhook and then they get elbowed in the head because they can't get their underhook back. Jose Aldo finished Nogueira like that. I like the higher knee shield, which is like kind of what Maia does. Maia tends to come into the single leg from like even closed guard now. He'll open his knees, he'll grab like one wrist, slide a knee in for a knee shield, and then just kick through his bottom leg to come up on the half guard. I think the butterfly half guard, you can see more. One of the more interesting guard showings lately that I was impressed by, even though it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things in that fight, was Asuncao versus Marias. Gets hurt, gets taken down, goes to the mat, half guard, puts the butterfly hook in, moves back to full butterfly guard, ready to start standing up, decides, no, he's a bit too strong for me and I'm still a bit wobbled, kicks all the way through to closed guard, goes back to butterfly guard, and sort of switches between the three. I think butterfly half guard is an interesting one because it's basically more butterfly guard than it is half guard. Very hard to pass a butterfly half guard well without taking some pressure off the dude. And it plays right into standing up, which I quite like. So I think butterfly half guard you're probably going to see a lot more of in the future. I mean, if you want to see a great example of bottom half guard, and I think there was a lot of butterfly half guard in the performance, Miguel Torres, when he fought Demetrius Johnson, he probably should have won that fight. He was sweeping Demetrius Johnson every which way whenever Demetrius Johnson took him down. And of course, the lockdown has still has some viability. Anderson Silva used to stall people out with that all the time. Stalled out DC, and DC is a great top player. Obviously, that's a little bit more dangerous because you need the proper. If you don't have underhooks, you're just pulling the guy down on top of you, and then he's going to eventually tripod up and get out, or go all the way around your buttocks and with his arms and smash his leg free. But the lockdown is really annoying to deal with. You won't see dudes hitting great sweeps out of it often, but you can stall out with it nicely. And stalling is legit in MMA. It's like using the clinch in boxing. You just have to use it long enough until the referee restarts you from a position that sucks less for you. Cheers, Hart. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. The Jack Slack Anime Hour. If you want to support the podcast and get history episodes, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgoneby@gmail.com. See what I'm doing at any time on thefightprimer.com. Subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you can watch the Filthy Casuals guides and share them with everyone you know. And I will catch you later in the week. I'm your boy Jack Slack. Shitty fight night bless.